let's talk about The King of Elfland's Daughter by Lord Dunsany, which is 1926 classic fantasy, 1924. Lord Dunsany made his bones about 20 years before that with some of the Time and the Gods sequence, which I'm sure I'll review at some point on the channel. But this is maybe his most famous novel, highly recommended by particularly Neil Gaiman, who writes the introduction to this edition, which is the Orion Gollancz edition. It's a really obvious influence on Neil Gaiman, this book, and in general Dunsany, but both stylistically, there's a lot of the kind of whimsical playfulness that you get in Gaiman, the imagery, the kinds of ways that Gaiman writes imagery, but also particularly this book is obviously an inspiration for Stardust. I think it's explicitly so. I think Gaiman has said so, but if it weren't, it'd be very obvious that it was. Also gets recommendations on the back from W.B. Yeats and Ursula K. Le Guin on the inside, Arthur C. Clarke, L. Sprague de Camp, and H.P. Lovecraft, and Lovecraft is certainly another obviously influenced writer, in terms of some of it being the way in which Dunsany talks about mystery, or creates strangeness and mystery, and some of it's stylistic as well, particularly in Lovecraft and some of the Dreamland sequences. Now, the particular book is about the Parliament of the village of Earl, which is its kind of own place, really. It's in England, next to Faerie. It's presumably a town and some surrounding places. It's got a lord. It's got the I don't know if the first lord that you meet has a name. The men of Earl go before their lord, and they say, this is the first page, they would like to be ruled by a magic lord. That what they voted the first time they've decided anything for a very long time, and they go and they say, we've all decided we'd like a magic lord in the future. And so the lord basically arranges it with his son Alveric ending up being married to the King of Elfland's daughter. That is the first couple of chapters summarised, and it's a necessary spoiler, because it's not a spoiler, it's the setup for the plot, because basically the rest of the book, after that, is all about what happens next. And a big thing is that there's consequences to this. This isn't something where you just go kind of say, oh, well, that's magical, or maybe there's some complications where the king, Ponyo style, the Little Mermaid style, the king wants his daughter back and he doesn't understand what's going on. It's that there are layered results and layered aftermaths to this. And it is much more than people expect and perhaps want. Things that happen, the side effects, the things that happen to the core characters are strange and mysterious. The biggest upside is, pretty obviously just that it's nicely written. Let's just flick. Yeah, he had thought little of turning back at all till the 10th evening came, and no pale blue mountains, and he suddenly looked at his provisions. And then at last, just as the darkness fell blackening that rocky multitude, there showed westward over the rocks, pale at first against remnants of sunset, but growing more and more orange, a window under one of the gables of man. Hey, that's not even a particularly remarkable scene. He's seen a house. But the imagery, the highly poeticized imagery, is he's very good at it, and that's one of the most obvious places in which you see him influencing Lovecraft and Gaiman, amongst others. You also, I'd say, Michael Moorcock does list him as an influence, and you can definitely see that with the kind of Baroque stylisms of particularly earlier Moorcock, and you can also see, in terms of some of the world building, and we'll get to that in a second, influence on Tolkien. World building wise, there is a really good, not dark fairy, it's not a sort of, isn't fairy terrifying, it's not Strange and Norrell. This is a progenitor, actually, as well, of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, but it's a much more ambiguous fairy than that. at least than the gentleman and stuff around that in Strange in the Rail. It is that really fairy is just very other, and that its standards make no sense. It's a very joyful, beautiful place, immune to the ravages of time, but it's also utterly alien to what we are used to and what we want. And he realises that well, and is very effective at that on the whole. And the degree to which there's not necessarily always a great logic to the world or the geography, when there perhaps could be. You could say, oh, well, even though fairy has different rules, maybe we could know about them, or maybe we know the geography of this side of, well, in Stardust, we'd call it the Wall. But that's not really of any interest to Lord Dunsany. And in that sense, there is a thinness to the world building, because the one thing he wants to accomplish is making us realise that our world, which is basically just about pre-modern farming civilization, is very different and draws dreams and is inspired by fairy, but basically can't merge well with this entirely other realm. For instance, particularly characterised by the lack of the passage of time. Character-wise, there are lots of characters, and you get plenty of time with it. The King of Elfland, his daughter, Alveric, and other key characters who come up. There's a witch, there's a troll called Luraloo. These are important characters who do several things. They are significant, but in terms of there's no meaningfully. There's very little character work. I mean, there are bits. It would be an exaggeration to sort of say just those vignettes with these characters in them and that's it. But there is a degree to which the vignettes kind of sometimes say, okay, well, this is what's happened to this character due to this stuff. There is what we would recognise as the bare bones of character arcs. But this isn't a book about characters, basically. And it's a book where the characters are vehicles for wonder and strangeness. So, yeah, and perhaps finally plot-wise, there is a plot, but there's virtually no sense of drama or forward impetus. That's not even an insult. I think it is a limitation, but it's just he's having a nice time describing stuff. He has some odd habits. So I think there's 2 or 3 chapters where an action seems to be basically repeated within the same chapter, and it may be being used as a repetition device. But it's boring. There are some slow bits. In that sense, it's a frustrating read, or it was a frustrating read for me, where I was like, the characters aren't really. There's no real inner life to the characters, and the plot is not perfunctory. There is a plot, and it matters in the same way the world building matters, but it's just relatively. There's no sense of drama to it. There's a sense of there's interest in how things might happen, a curiosity about the way this strange world will interact with our world, but no drama, no threat in that sense, no dramatic threat. So yeah, one exception to my issues about what I guess you could call them pacing and structure is the ending is very, very strong, very beautiful and very powerful. But my general experience was this was a nice read that I enjoyed, and it's not that long. This edition is 240 pages, including the introduction, possibly, no, excluding the introduction, that is in Roman numerals. So 240 pages pretty much dead, and it wasn't a massive waste of my time or anything. I enjoyed it, but I would say you should read it if you like Gaiman, if you like Lovecraft, if you like Moorcock, if you like atmospherics and environmental books, and that you're going to enjoy it less if you strongly need really driven plot or really integral character development. That's what I thought of King of Elfland's Daughter. If you have read it, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments, and other favourite fairy style, modern fairy style stories. Till next time.